welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. I hope you guys can hear me. I've been having issues with my mic today. So if you can't hear me, please comment and let me know because I'm just here trying to get through another day. Second week of school, a nice short holiday week, and I'm grateful. And I'm so glad to be here with you this evening. Just wanted to come by this evening to take a minute to talk about opening up your hands, what that means. And I think I've talked about this before, but I was just reminded of this today, of how important it is that we be willing to open our hands and to give of what we have and even the things that we think we don't have. So it's Wednesday, it's midweek. If this is your first time catching one of my lives, my name is Naomi. I go by the How To Chick. I'm a child of God, a wife, a mom, an attorney, a coach, a mentor, and a speaker. I believe that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. But it is so important that you choose wisely. And I come on Wednesday nights to talk a little bit about love, a little bit about life, and a lot about relationships, most specifically the relationships that we have with God and ourselves. And tonight I'm talking about the cultural phenomenon that we call self interest, that I call self interest. I was reminded today that there are some times where we are called to do more than we can do. There's a saying that I've been hearing since I was a child, don't know where it started, don't know where it came from, but it says God won't put more on you than you can bear. And I'm here to tell you, if I haven't told you before, that is absolutely not true. It is incorrect, categorically, unequivocally false. God will absolutely put more on you than you can bear. God is trying to teach us one very important truth. And I'll start by telling you guys that I've talked about points in my life. We've all had ups and downs and highs and lows and valleys, but there have been a couple of points in my life that have defined my relationship with God, and both of them revolved around loss, losing a job, losing a person, losing a sense of identity, right? And I remember when I lost a job that I thought I was going to make an early career out of in Atlanta in sales. I think I was like maybe 21, 22. And I had just bought this car that I couldn't afford. I loved my car, my 2005 Nissan Altima. That car was really great. First and only to date, new car purchase. Loved that car. And I felt so unmoored. I felt like a failure. I felt like I wasn't going to accomplish anything that I had set out to accomplish in my life. I remember applying for dozens of jobs every day, getting no calls back. I was so demoralized and so stressed and overwhelmed um, that even though I knew that I would find a place to work at the time, I had a very good habit that served me in good stead during that period of working multiple jobs because student loans. Sally Mae wanted her money, right? Um, so I had a job at a restaurant that paid enough for me to scrape by if I, didn't buy any food and really didn't drive anywhere, right? And I remember walking around in the middle of the night because I only had evening shifts. I don't even think the restaurant was open for lunch at the time. It was a little boutique kind of thing in a little trendy place in Atlanta. And I think they were only open for dinner. And I remember walking around during the day. I was walking around next to the Chattahoochee River near where I was living at the time in my apartments. And I'm walking out, and I remember God saying, "What are you doing? Go do something." And I'm like, "What do you mean go do something? I don't want to drive my car. I don't have any gas and I don't have any money. So what do you mean by go do something?" And immediately, as I repeated it to myself, I knew. And so I got up and I went. I want to say it was the internet, but guys, it was so long ago, it could have been the yellow pages. And I know I'm aging myself here. And I found a women's shelter for domestic violence victims. And I called them up and I said, "Hey, do you guys need any volunteers?" They were like, "Yeah, we need someone to teach literacy. We need someone to watch the kids. We need someone to work with women and helping them prepare resumes." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm coming, let me know where you need me." And for 3 months, I volunteered there 3 days a week. It was about 12 miles from my house. still don't know how I was affording the gas. There were days where I considered taking the bus to my second job. Still don't know how I afforded the gas. And I got up and I went there. And every day, despite how I felt about where I was in my life, I saw these women who had had the courage to walk away from deeply painful experiences where they were wounded, where they had lost not only their identity and their self esteem, but also sometimes their looks and their financial resources. They had walked away from everything they had to save their lives and the lives of their children. And it gave me perspective. So at the time, I didn't have children. I didn't have anything that was keeping me from being able to just say, I need to sublet my apartment out and move in with somebody because I can't afford the rent. And so I was able to give myself perspective in that circumstance. And I remember walking around praying one evening and I was like, God, there was one lady that I was trying to help and she was getting worn down because the shelter had a limited number of beds, a limited amount of time. And she was running out of time. She needed to pay her car insurance and she didn't have a lot of help and she needed a job desperately. And I was trying to help her, but she didn't have a whole lot of marketable skills. And I remember praying for her, not with her. I wasn't that brave back then. And God reminding me that He sent me there to the shelter for that reason, not just to get perspective, but to reach into people whose situations were much more dire than mine in many ways and to show them who He was. And I don't remember much about that time at the shelter, but the only thing I remember is the day she didn't come back. She had gotten some kind of emergency housing through the county and she had gotten a job. So she no longer needed to come in and utilize the child care and the services to help her with resumes and looking for jobs. She was no longer there because she did not have that need anymore. And I don't remember much again about that time, but I remember the perspective that I got. And I remember never running out of or worrying about money to pay for my gas. The time I'm living in, and you guys know the rent has never gone down, but it wasn't as high then as it is now, but it was still high, right? So I'm paying all my bills, my rent, my utilities, my car note, my insurance, my gas, my food, my student loans. And during this period, I didn't miss any bills. And during this period, I got a job. And I remember the day I told the lady, I was like, I'm not going to be able to come in during the days anymore. I may be able to come in during the evenings. And sadly and alas, I did not do that. And the reason was at the time I still needed to keep two jobs to keep Sally Mae paid. And so I couldn't really fit in the volunteer work because they closed at 6. But I remember that during that period, I didn't have a lack and I didn't have a need. I didn't run out of food. I didn't run out of gas. I didn't even have to borrow money. And during that period, I was calling my mom a lot. There was most of us have had that point in our early lives during college or right after where we're constantly calling our parents. We're 20, 40, 60, $200 short at the end of the week. And we're calling during that period, during the period when I was willing to get in my car and drive 12 miles out of my way to show up for someone else who had a need. I didn't have a need. I did not have a need that was not met during that season, so I can never forget that. And the second period was just a couple of years ago. I lost my job and I had gone through a really hard season. I had lost a couple of family members and I've talked about this and I was so sad because not only did I suffer these losses, but I didn't feel validated for these losses. I didn't feel supported in these losses. I felt rejected. I felt abandoned. I felt alone. And I also felt like a failure in many ways because that is what happens, right? When we have our identity tied to what we do in a way, as opposed to simply who we are and whose we are, which is why I speak so much about the value of making sure our identity is solidly grounded in who we are and whose we are. And so my grandmother passed New Year's Eve 2021 to, I guess it would be January 1st of 2022, but she passed before midnight, so it was the end of 21. And that was the point where I sat down because it had been coming, right? There had been hospice, there had been cancer treatments, there had been back and forth for months and months and months. It had been her, it had been her brother, my great uncle. And I had been so busy doing the things that I hadn't had the occasion to feel the things. So when it happened and when it hit me, I really was laid flat. I was not okay. I wasn't able to do the things and be the person that I knew I could be. But, my grandmother left an inheritance for all of her grandchildren. She loved us and she left us equal amounts, even though my brother, the oldest four are not her biological grandchildren. And I remember talking to her about it and kind of the things that she would say. And it was just a reminder, right? That sometimes not just being kind and not just showing up for people, but remembering people in ways big and small really make a difference to how they feel about themselves. Because, I loved my grandmother. We had a great relationship, but I always wondered if she saw us the same as her biological grandchildren. And in the end, I recognized that she did. And it was really, really amazing. And it was, anyway, it was something that helped me feel validated and seen and not rejected. And so the inheritance comes, and I'm thinking, thank God, a couple of months that we can get by while we try to sort out all of this stuff with me losing my job. And all of a sudden, I'm thrust into a situation where we are reacclimating our godchildren into our home permanently. And I'm thinking, God, I don't have the resources for this. This is not the best time for this particular situation. And I was having the conversation, and he was like, but I said what I said, right? Because I've told you guys before, God has told me very clearly what my assignments are, when they are, and what I'm to do in those assignments. And so I knew he said what he said. I knew it was going to be what it was going to be. And I had a choice to make, right? So with this inheritance, and it wasn't a big amount, there are five kids, six kids at the time. No, five. I said it right. My brother passed before my grandmother. Guys, this is what time and grief do to your memories, right? And there were five of us, and so it was split. And so we get the funds, and I immediately am like, okay, I'm returning Ty, and I'm going to go ahead and buy these flights to make sure that the kids get here and they get everything they need. And we are going to go visit colleges, right? For my oldest goddaughter was graduating high school that year. We needed to go do some college tours. And I couldn't, like, my husband and I had these conversations. We agreed about what needed to be done, but there was just no way that having these conversations with other people was going to fly, because they would have been like, are you crazy? Do you have, 6 months of your bills in an account for emergencies? What is it that you are doing here? Because this isn't that much money to begin with. And the way that you're talking about allocating it does not comport with what a person who has just lost her job should be doing, right? And I felt absolutely no qualms about the way that I was going to spend those funds and use those resources, because I knew what I was being called to do. And in doing that, I was able to go visit a couple of colleges with my oldest goddaughter, take all of the kids down to alumni weekend at what would ultimately become the university that she attended and was the alma mater of my husband and I. And we had an amazing year. And when I say an amazing year, I went back, right? And I looked at our tax returns from that year. And I'm not embarrassed. I'm actually proud to say that in that year, we made less than we had made as a married couple since 2011. And we supported a family of seven. We never, bills were paid, car was paid, rent was paid. Um, we went on two vacations that we did not pay for in that year. And when I look back at that time, I mean, the kids had clothes. They may not have had, whatever name brand the kids are wearing these days. Now I really am dating myself. But they got back to school shopping. And I thank my mom because my mom was very much like, what do they need? Send me a list, all these things. But there was not a need that was not met in that year. There was not there were periods, right, of distress and grief. I'm not going to sit here and play in your face and pretend I was okay. There were times I was on my face before the Lord, like, God, how are we going to get through this year? God, how are we going to get through this month? God, how are we going to get through this week? But that never changed his faithfulness, because in the season where we took everything that we had and we said, okay, this is what we have. And God, we recognize that what needs to happen is beyond what's happening in our home. It's beyond paying our rent and our bills. We have bigger things that need to happen with these resources. And so we have to trust that if we are willing to commit time, energy, resources to doing what it is that you need done, that you're going to fix everything else. You're going to take care of it. And it was taken care of. And not only that, but in that period, he also revealed to us that there were people around us that were actively, and I've said this before, but I think it's really, really important that people recognize. I was a person who did not believe in haters. I said, nobody's hating on me. What do I have to be hated on? I have what God has provided and nothing more. There are people who will hate on you because of God's favor on your life. There are people who will hate on you because they can sit back and see what God has done for them, for you, and they're mad that he hasn't done it for them. There are people who will hate on you just because you have $1.15 more than them. That is not your business. But in the seasons where you're walking in obedience and the favor is being poured on you, the Psalms 23rd says he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil. My cup runneth over. When I looked at my tax returns from 2022, what I recognized is that God math, and I say this a lot, but I need to define it, because God math, just like God doesn't exist and is not bound by time, God math is not bound by the laws of mathematics, okay? The things that we were blessed with, the things that we were able to do, the places that we were able to go, those were not in our budget. The kids to this day talk about the vacations we took that year as better than the ones that I'm blowing, thousands of dollars on to do every single year, because they recall the blessing and the favor. And so when I talk about opening your hands, what I mean is acknowledging what you have, your resources, whether it's your time, your talents, your money. The Bible says God loves a cheerful giver, and that we are to give generously out of the substance that we have. God isn't always just talking about money, but we live in 2024 in a capitalistic, consumeristic, self and identity driven culture. Much of the issues that we have are because our wants outpace our needs. There's this text, and I just had my daughter read it tonight in Haggai, that says, you eat, but you're always hungry. You drink, but you're always thirsty. You work all the time, and you never have any money. And the reason is because at the time the prophet was talking about the fact that the temple had not been rebuilt. The temple was in ruins. And so God is telling them, you're focused on the wrong things. You're trying to stretch your money. You're trying to provide for your home. You're trying to bolster your savings. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with occupying. There's nothing wrong with saving. There's nothing wrong with making sure that we are being financially wise. But when it is that we flip from occupying appropriately, right? From paying our bills on time, from rendering to Caesar and paying our taxes, from simply doing what is right to doing what serves us. You know, yes, we need a vehicle, but do we need a 2024 um, Mercedes? I'm, and again, this is not, I'm not here to judge people's spending decisions. I'm talking about what you have that you know for a fact that you are being called to use in another way that you're not doing. And what happens when you don't do that? I'm grateful right now to be sitting here and saying that there are only a few times in my life where my hand has been closed. There are only a few times in my life that I can remember saying no to somebody and feeling as though I should have said yes, because that point immediately comes and I'm immediately rebuked and I'm reminded of what happens when I do say yes. And what happens is that when we test God, what does Malachi 3 say? God says, "Prove me now herewith, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that you will not have room enough to receive it." What do we have that we are withholding? What ministry, what gift, what talent do we have that we should be using in service of God and others? Are we holding on to our Netflix shows and whatever shows we want to watch and choosing not to get involved in a ministry or volunteer somewhere because it would conflict with that? Are we holding on to financial resources that we're being called to give to bless someone else, not because we have an immediate need, but because just in case? It's not about what you have, it's about how you use it. And I was reminded today that the parable of the talents wasn't just about gifts. It wasn't just about a singing talent or a talent of stewardship or management or preaching or teaching. It was about everything that God has given us. Because everything that He has given us, first of all, started off as His. And second of all, He has the capacity, right, to make it more or less according to how we have purposed in our heart to use it. If we choose to open our hands, if we choose to enter a posture of giving, at the same time, there's a reciprocal posture that we have, and that posture is to receive. When it is that we are giving, see, the scriptures don't just invoke giving stingily. You know how they come around and hold on, let me grab this with the offering plate, and you dug down into the bottom of your purse and you found a coin and you're dropping it like so. You can't really receive like that. You have to open your hands. You have to be willing to give everything in order to receive everything. And I know that there are some good tithe paying, Bible believing Christians who are going to hear this message and think God never called us to give everything. God called us to give a tenth, but that's where you've missed the point. In Matthew 23:23, God said, the Pharisees are tithing everything. They're tithing to a tenth of their spices, their dill and their cumin. They're tithing everything, but their hearts are not with me. The posture of being willing to give everything is a posture of acknowledging that the work that I've done, the degrees that I have, the education and the resources, the salary that I'm able to command is not a result of my hard work, but it is a result of the blessings of God and the favor of God on my life. And so I have to be willing to give everything. Because if I am not, then I am not acknowledging that God is the one who gave me everything. And that was the recognition that I came to today, because there have been some places and some spaces in my life where I've been holding out, some places where I have felt like I needed to withhold for my own mental peace, right? And I've talked about things that we should do, things that we could do, right? Things. But when it comes to things that I've been impressed to do that the Holy Spirit has told me to do, there have been times where I've said, okay, I can do it, but I can only go so far. I can't do all of this. I can't do everything. And I want to encourage you as I encourage myself. God is calling us to not give a tenth, but to give our hearts. God is calling us to not do what we can, but to use everything that we have to allow Him to do what He can. God is not asking us, right, to sell all of our goods and give them to the poor. He's asking us to be willing to release our ideas of what a perfect life looks like, our plans for the next phase of our life, our financial priorities, right? And our use of our time to Him, for Him to do what He can do with what we have. We read the scriptures, but we don't believe them, because if we believed them, we would live differently. If we believed them, we would receive differently. If we believed them, then we would be a lighthouse for the world. When Jesus took the bread and broke it and fed 4,000 and then 5,000 people, that was just a small manifestation of what He can do if we give Him. So I encourage you to look at what you have. What do you have in your hand? What are you holding? What are you hiding behind your back? What are you reserving unto yourself? What has God called you to give? Analyze, evaluate, study your own heart, and then tell yourself the truth and open up your hands. Guys, I hope this has been helpful for you. It has been a week for me, a week of conviction, a week of conversion. And that's a wonderful thing. A wonderful place to be is when God is still working on you, right? He's still working on all of us. And I encourage you to remember that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Choose wisely. And for me, that means let God do the choosing. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next week for Wisdom Wednesday. Good night.